Hello and most welcome to 1678 of the Heidegger series. We will continue today where I left off at 1676, page 93. The very last thing we discussed were grammatical sentences. Now they are lacking sense in certain ways. They're pointing to language itself and our use of language. And it's the first quote from Notes for Lectures on Private Experience and Sense Data. Surely, I want to say, if I am to be quite frank, I must say that I have something which nobody else has. But who's I? Hell, I don't express myself properly. But there is something, you cannot deny that there is my personal experience, and that this, in a most important sense, has no neighbor. But you don't mean that it happens to be alone, but that its grammatical position is that of having no neighbor. None of this excludes the possibility of talking about sense data. But if you decide to do so, Wittgenstein says, I not only have to take care not to confuse normal sensible sentences and grammatical sentences, but I also have to take my decision seriously. That is, I must not speak of sense data as if they were merely another kind of object. Different from ordinary physical objects, but nonetheless objects about which we can speak in similar terms. For this notion is quite mistaken, as Wittgenstein points out in the Blue Book. Those who say that sense datum is a different kind of object from a physical object misunderstand the grammar of the word kind. They think they are making such a statement as a railway train, a railway station, and a railway car are different kinds of objects, whereas their statements are analogous to a railway trains, a railway accident, and a railway law are different kinds of objects. If I seriously want to speak of my sense data, Wittgenstein says, I must put up with the consequences. One such consequence is that I shall have to use a notion of identity different from the one appropriate to physical objects. Thus, whereas we normally use the word same in a transitive way, sense data may be such that we cannot help saying that A equals B and B equals C. But A is not equal to C. After all, in the realm of sense data, we have to take things as they are given to us. We cannot change our point of view without losing sight of those data. A second consequence in taking sense data seriously is that I shall have to put up with the incommunicability of what I think I am really seeing. This means that I have to get myself into a solipsistic mode, as Wittgenstein says at one point. But then much of what I am tempted to say becomes pointless, misleading, utterly wrong. If I try to point to my sense data, for example, I cannot do it with my finger. It must be a kind of visual pointing, and hence incommunicable. In the Blue Book, Wittgenstein says, when in a solipsistic way I say, this is what's really seen. I point before me, and it is essentially that I point visually. If I pointed sideways or behind me, the pointing would in this case be meaningless to me. It would not be pointing in the sense in which I wish to point. But this means that when I point before me, saying this is what I've really seen, although I make the gesture of pointing, I don't point to one thing as opposed to another. This is as when traveling in a car and feeling in a hurry. I instinctively press against something in front of me, as though I could push the car from the inside. When I made my solipsistic statement, I pointed, but I robbed the pointing of its sense. by inseparably connecting that which points and that to which it points. I constructed a clock with all its wheels, etc., and in the end fastened the dial to the pointer and made it go around with it. Thus, if Wittgenstein is right, then More's analysis of judgments of perception, according to which such judgments are both about sense data and material objects, is misguided for at least two reasons. Thus, if Wittgenstein is right, then More's analysis of judgments of perception, according to which such judgments are both about sense data and material objects, is misguided for at least two reasons. First, More does not keep separate what needs to be separated, namely normal empirical sentences from grammatical sentences and sentences about physical objects from sentences about sense data. Secondly, more believes that sense data can be named and pointed to in a manner analogous to that which we name and point to physical objects. This, however, is a mistake. The language games we can play when using expressions for sense data are entirely different from those we can play with words for physical objects. They are as different from each other as our language games with words for railway stations are different from language games with words for railway shares. Chapter 7, page 95. Memory. Many of our everyday or scientific considerations regarding psychological processes are based on a simple model which even at a second glance may still appear convincing. This is the model of a magic Latin, of an incessantly and inexorably running film, of a constant succession of representations. There is no difficulty in reconciling this model with any of the traditional conceptions of sense perception. But problems arise as soon as our knowledge of the past is in question. For on the one hand, it is inconceivable to have real knowledge without having memories, while on the other hand it appears extremely difficult for a view agreeing with the model of a magic Latin to accommodate memories. Without at the same time depriving them of their essential function of informing us about something which is not present, that is about the past, and of possibly constituting the past for us. The reason why questions about the place of memory may become problematic is that in the magic Latin there only appears to be space for that which is going on now. Here there is never more than one image at a time. And even though this image may be immensely complex and involved, it will never by itself indicate whether or not it is an image of something past. How am I, the owner of the magic Latin, to know if a representation concerns something present or something future or something past? Does the stream of consciousness contain any indicator assigning the right position in the sequence of time to the objects of the passing flow of images? Or do we have to reckon with the possibility that our division of represented events into past, present and future ones is without a foundation and perhaps a mere illusion? The basic question about the locus of memories, according to the magic Latin model, is this: what makes a representation a copy of an earlier representation? It is this question which is asked by particular vigor by William James. He begins by defining the concept of memory in terms of the knowledge of an event or fact. With the additional consciousness that we have thought or experienced it before. From this definition, it immediately follows that a mere representation of event is not in itself sufficient to mark it as a memory. For what it still lacks is the consciousness of a former experience. James thinks that the image James thinks that the image must be richer than if it is to form an object of memory. It will in addition have to comprise one, a general feeling of the past direction of time. 2. Orientation about our whereabouts on the memory path through a relative date, which in many cases involves symbolic means. Three, a context of adjoining events or facts, which helps to specify the relevant event or fact and 4, the thought that it is part of the experience of myself. The subject of the relevant representation. But even this complex object is not sufficiently determinate to count as one of memory. What is missing is the crucial characteristic quality of reality, without which there would be no way of distinguishing between a fantasy of something supposedly past and a real memory image. To be sure, within the scope of a purely subjective approach, it will not do merely to add the condition that the event in question has really taken place and has really been perceived by me. The reality of that event is not a property of my present representation. And cannot be read off from it. According to James, the missing characteristic which turns the relevant object into an object of memory is an emotion, and hence a subjective mark, forming an essential constituent of memory. The object of memory is only an object imagined in the past to which the emotion of belief adheres. Some of Russell's remarks on memory are in a similar subjective vein. Russell emphasizes that there is no logical relation between what we call our knowledge of the past and the past itself. Not even the existence of a past will logically follow from our assertions of knowledge of past events. And I will continue after the pause. Thank you very much. So we continue the read. In order to illustrate this view, Russell's develops his well-known hypothesis, according to which it is logically possible that the world has sprung into being 5 minutes ago, and together with a population with memories to which no reality corresponds. Once this logical possibility is recognized, it becomes particularly urgent to discover some characteristic which distinguishes memories from other kinds of contents of consciousness. In this context, Russell appeals to two feelings or kinds of feeling, namely feeling of pastness on the one hand, and feelings of familiarity on the other. Feeling of pastness may, for instance, be connected with a decreasing intensity of a representation with the increasing faintness of a memory image. And these phenomena will often be accompanied by relative dates, which may be inferred ones. these feelings contribute to assigning our memories to their proper positions in the time order. Feelings of familiarity will help us decide how far we can rely on something that appears to be a memory, if there's no further reason for doubting it. Whenever the degree of familiarity dwindles, we tend to call the memory claim in question, or we reject it altogether. Wittgenstein's remarks on the concept of memory can be read in part as replies to a conception which includes elements of the theories held by Russell and James. In particular, there are three characteristics of that conception which are criticized by Wittgenstein. Namely, the idea of a memory image, the notion of experiential content of a memory, and the thesis that a memory is embedded in a certain feelings These three topics, which are mentioned time and again in Wittgenstein's remarks on the philosophy of psychology are not always strictly separated by him. For it may happen that an image is regarded as a part of an alleged content, and the experiential content may be interpreted as a specific feeling or as something which depends on a feeling. Here, Wittgenstein's objections are not chiefly directed against those concepts as such, or against possible existential claims involved in the use they are directed against certain theoretical applications of these concepts, and against certain aims that go along with some existential claims. These qualifications regarding Wittgenstein's critical statements are in place. If, for instance, we said in a general way that Wittgenstein criticizes the concept of a memory image, it would be completely unclear what this criticism might be supposed to achieve. After all, memory images are something which we, all of us, know from our own experience. We can see them before our inner eyes. We can articulate and describe them in such a way that other people too will be able to imagine what they are like. No, it is not the real occurrence of such pictures which is disputed by Wittgenstein. He asks where the concept of an inner image is needed. The legitimacy of this question becomes manifest as soon as we think of everyday situations where the concept of memory is used. For in such situations, allusions to memory images appear to play no considerable role. When we make a memory statement, we do not normally appeal to anything inner. Without further ado, we simply volunteer information about the past. If someone asks me what I have been doing the last 2 hours, I answer him straight off, and do not read the answer off from an experience I'm having. And yet one says that I remembered, and that this is a mental process. So far, however, this amounts to no more than saying that we, as a matter of fact, need not always appeal to memory images to answer a question about the past from memory. But it seems that Wittgenstein means to be able to make a more radical claim, namely that it's possible to give a description of something past from memory without an accompanying inner picture, or in other words, that such a description makes sense. This is the reason why he wonders whether there could be people who are able to give exact descriptions of certain details from memory, while denying that they are seeing the desired object before them, that is, people who would find the expression "I see him before me" totally inappropriate. Although Wittgenstein does not answer this question with a univocal yes, it is rendered clear by the context that such a possibility is not to be excluded. But the conceivability of such state of affairs does not imply that we cannot answer the question of whether visual representations do occur. All that follows is that reliable memory statements do not themselves yield a sufficient reason for maintaining that memory images really must exist. Memory images are not generally necessary conditions of memories. This hint at the conceivability of reliable memory statements, in spite of the complete absence of accompanying memory images, springs neither from a mere whim nor from a theoretical urge to explore all possibilities. It is likely that the fact that the later Wittgenstein displays little confidence in notions like picture or image is due to his critical attitude towards some of the central ideas of the Tractatus. Thus he regards it as misguided to think that one has already done everything by speaking of a picture. the concept of a picture or image may mislead us because it suggests certain possibilities of application which are not really open to us in the given case. Thus, it is plausible to think of the possibility of a comparison when something of a pictorial nature is mentioned. We place a portrait beside the original, a photograph beside another photograph, a drawing beside a photograph, and so forth. What kind of comparison may we think of, however, if the picture concerned is a memory image? Take the case of someone who recognizes a person and at the same time notices in which ways this person has changed since the last encounter. If here you make an uncritical attempt at applying the notion of a picture, you will be apt to explain this perception by claiming that it is due to a confrontation of a visual image and a memory image. As if two pictures were getting compared here. But this idea is erroneous, because a memory image cannot be placed beside either a different inner picture or besides the object of memory. Even though it may be possible to scrutinize my memory images, to analyze them, and to produce various descriptions of them, I cannot, while I'm seeing a certain memory image, look at any kind of picture. The misleading character of the idea of comparing a memory image with the original or with a different picture becomes important when we are dealing with questions like the following. What is it that we can learn from memory? To what extent may we rely on memory? To what degree is memory constitutive of knowledge? Suppose I am really having memory images in my mind. When I come to think about the question of whether the picture which I am seeing are really in agreement with former visual experiences, as it were copies of past sense impressions. Excuse me. I shall find that there is no method of confirming or refuting such an assumption. It may even be the case that in reminiscing I see things from a perspective which I'm sure was not accessible to me at the time. Yet the memory itself appears nonetheless reliable. I think this is the important point. The misleading character of the idea of comparing a memory image with the original or with a different picture becomes important when we are dealing with questions like the following. What is it that we can learn from memory? To what extent may we rely on memory? To what degree is memory constitutive of knowledge? Suppose I am really having memory images in my mind. When I come to think about the question whether the pictures which I am seeing are really in agreement with former visual experiences, as it were copies of past sensations, I shall find that there is no method of confirming or refuting such an assumption. It may even be the case that in reminiscing I see things from a perspective which I'm sure was not accessible to me at the time. Yet the memory itself appears nonetheless reliable. As it is not possible to compare my memory images with different pictures, the idea of assigning these memory images the status of objective evidence must be generally excluded. That, however, does not mean that one should always distrust one's memory images. What it means is that they belong to a different category from generally accessible clues. My memory image is not evidence of that past situation. As a photograph would be, which having been taken then, now bears witness to me that this is how it was then. The memory image and the memory words are on the same level. Whether or not I am entertaining memory images is irrelevant to the degree of certainty of my memory statements. And even for myself, a memory does not become more reliable if I have clear and vividly colorful pictures in my head. The non-visual thoughts at the time such and such was the case may accomplish the same. It cannot be denied that there is a categorical difference between memory images and evidence of the kind provided by photographs or dated drawings. But we may nonetheless wonder why it appears so plausible to compare memory with a kind of seeing into the past, if the relation between memory images and the concept of memory is, as Wittgenstein seems to suggest, a purely contingent one. According to Wittgenstein, it is, however, exactly this comparison of remembering and seeing into the past which is misleading. Dreaming might be called that when it presents the past to us, but not remembering, for even if it showed scenes with hallucinatory clarity, still it takes remembering to tell us that this is past. But here two problems arise immediately. First, what does it mean to say that only memory teaches us what is past? And secondly, provided the first question has been answered satisfactorily, what is therefore wrong about the comparison between remembering and seeing into the past? So once more we have the well-known problem with inner pictures, inner sound, inner speech that are causative of something like memory. This can duly be compared to perception, an original perception in the mind. Consciousness, apart from everything that we do in our world and intentions and doings, knowledge, there's just consciousness as well. And in counting, we mentioned 2 episodes ago that, or 1 episode, it was 1677, that there are, so to speak, original counting within one's head, from where the numbers stem. Something I think has led to the construction of the mistaken idea of Platonic real numbers. So there are similarities, but the case of memory is especially an especially difficult one. Why? Well, very often when we do remember, an image comes to our minds so quick. That's the lightning speed of memory. Or some words or a description of what happened. And of course, as always, image is the most difficult one to handle. Sort of more persistent than words. I would say it opens up a whole Pandora's box, in a positive way. I shouldn't say Pandora's box, but it opens up so much. It's just unfathomable. I can't take it in. Extraordinary interesting. I think I'll end there. I'll have a summary soon. Thank you very much for your patience, and have a very pleasant afternoon.